What steps did you take in order to complete this week's milestone? In the interest of saving time, I decided to re-watch the certification videos in an effort to refresh my understanding of the SketchUp software. I began by observing the plans provided in detail. I noticed most of the components used in the wall frames were the same. I decided to make the 2x4s in nominal dimensions to the various lengths required. I then began to construct the wall frame from already created components. The construction process was simple yet time-consuming. Those were the steps I undertook to complete this week's milestone. What was the most difficult part of creating this week's portion? The most difficult part of this week's portion was the same as the last portion. I again had trouble calculating the spacing between the studs. The spacing had to be equal, so there was an even distribution of the load on the studs. Similar to last's portion, I used a mathematical scale to calculate the spacing of the studs. This allowed me to set the studs at the correct, evenly spaced distance. How do you think this compares to creating it in the real world? This week's milestone on SketchUp compares to the real-world applications. After creating the components, I had to assemble them into the wall frames. The assembly of the frames is no different than real-world applications. The dimensions, placement and spacing is the same on SketchUp as in the real-world assembly. What aspects of this milestone do you foresee as being the more difficult portion to recreate in real life? The spacing and placement of the wall frames will be the more difficult portions in real-world applications. The correct spacing and placement of the framing components are critical to ensure the uniform distribution of the load from the roof down to the foundation. The uniform distribution of the load is essential for the safety of the construction project.